We now need to catch up with Tim Wilson. We'll go into Sydney and catch up with the former Liberal MP who lost his seat to a teal campaign, his seat in Melbourne to a teal campaign last weekend, or the weekend before last. Time flies, Tim. Thanks for joining us, Tim. We talked a bit on the program tonight about climate policy and the need to hit back at some of the misinformation or extraordinary claims and policies put forward by the Teals. Now, you know this area backwards. You've studied it. Why hasn't the Coalition been able to expose some of the fallacies that are put forward, some of the unworkable policy positions put forward?
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be the meat in your Tim sandwich, it seems. But the challenge we face in this space is that so many people are disengaged from the detail. There's obviously bold promises that are made about what's achievable, but the practical realities are more challenging, and not set out of a wish or an ambition that they be challenging, but the reality they're challenging. I'll give you an example. In my one of my last decisions as the Minister responsible for offshore electricity, I decided to place and kickstart Australia's offshore wind industry. The practical reality is the first offshore wind turbine won't be up for somewhere around 8 years. But when I raised that with my opponent locally, they said, well, that's just not good enough. Make it happen sooner, or you didn't really make that happen. And so they're just engaging in dishonesty about the realities of climate policy and the consequences of what they want. They have no plan to develop or to back it in. In fact, if you go and look at their own policy, what they said was they have these big targets and then somebody else's job is to come up with a plan. And that was enough. It was the simplification of what is going to be one of the most challenging exercises we're going to have for the rebuilding of Australia's clean industrial economy.
I think the trouble is it's very emotive, right? And the contest here is emotion versus reason. And that's often the case in political debates. And the right of politics usually goes with reason and rational arguments, and they have to overcome the emotionalism of the left. But where did we see in this campaign where the Coalition was bold enough to challenge this emotionalism, this alarmism, and also, frankly, these puerile suggestions that we can deliver a land of milk and honey, a land without bushfires and floods and droughts, just by voting for some women in teal T-shirts?
Well, as you know, if you want to spend your time scaring the community and using emotion as the basis of your argument, the only way that you can beat them is to go even further. Now, that's not practical or proportionate or sensible. Our job is to be responsible, and it's not necessarily to defeat their arguments, to put other arguments in place. And, in the last week, obviously, I would argue, unfortunately, it was probably too late. We put up alternative policies to give people something to fight for, particularly around housing policy and particularly around making sure the decisions of priorities of public policy are orientated toward people's stages of life. So home first, super second. And that's what you need to do to successfully win campaigns. It's not to fight on your opponent's turf, but also not necessarily to try and out-emotion them. It's to say that there are other considerations and other priorities, and this is what we offer.
So, Tim, do you think that these Teals will be a bit of a flash in the pan? Do you think the brutal reality of our economic and energy challenges will become clear over the next 3 months, maybe with some help from the Coalition, and whether people like you might be able to line up and win those seats back, or are you going to be heading off and doing something else?
Well, I think global economic and energy and security realities are dawning on our country. I don't think it'll be in 3 months, but I certainly think it'll be over the next 6 to 12 months. And it's going to expose the hollowness of talking rhetoric over reality. And so I do think there's a big challenge for a lot of these candidates in this space. But I think the other thing that's going to expose them is the dishonesty of their campaigns. When, for instance, the so-called independent-in-chief, Cathy McGowan, was asked, well, why are you only running in Liberal seats? It was, well, because they're in government and therefore they're the ones who need to be held into account. If you then go and look at the state election, both Victoria and New South Wales, they're not talking about running in Labor seats. Again, they're only talking about Liberal seats. And in Victoria, last I checked, the Liberal Party was in opposition. So obviously there's a dishonesty at the heart of their campaigns. The reality of this teal movement is it's designed to do one thing: deny anyone else the opportunity to be an organised political force to form government. If you do that, then only one party benefits, which is the Labor Party. So they're not trying to be Labor in disguise. They're trying to deny the Liberals and the Nationals the pathway to form government, and they've obviously done that federally, and that means it only benefits one political force, which is the Labor Party.
So will you be back, Tim?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Apologies.
Will you be back? Will you try and win Goldstein back?
I'm waiting to see what's going to happen. Like everybody else, I haven't ruled it out. But the reality is there'll be another redistribution in Victoria between now and the next federal election, assuming it's within with its normal 3-year time cycle. But I can assure you that you haven't seen the last of me in public life. It's just what capacity I'm able to serve. Because, Chris, one of the things that can happen after these events is people can be bitter, they can be angry, and they can show an ingratitude. I just have an enormous sense of gratitude of the privilege I've had already for over 6 years. I believe I used them very strongly, whether it was stopping the China extradition treaty, driving the agenda to deliver marriage equality, stopping Labor's retiree tax, or kickstarting Australia's offshore wind industry. And the enormous privilege I had and the gratitude that I should have for that privilege. And of course, you always wanted to go on longer. That's why I contested the last election. But I was only ever in public life to do good by the country and to build Australia's future. And I think some members of Parliament sometimes need to remember that.
Well, Tim Wilson, commiserations on what's transpired, and we wait to see what unfolds next. Thanks for joining us again.